But the show will be dominated by Chief Spence and her hunger strike. Hunger strike? My wife and I went out for dinner on Saturday night. It was a wonderful hunger strike, darling. And anyway, a lot to talk about. I really don't know where to start. You know, again, I'm always candid with you. I have nothing written on the prompter here. I'm just talking to you because over the weekend I've been disgusted, actually, just by the cowardice and the dishonesty of mainstream media in particular. This has to be said, and in particular Ezra Levant. He's not a rival, he's a friend, he's a colleague, a comrade. His work has been sterling and stellar on this subject. And now the people are beginning to break the stories about what's really going on with Chief Spence, and their viewers and their readers are saying, well done, we've been doing that for a week, for goodness sake. Now, a lot to be discussed on this show. Before we do that, and this I think is a very good example of the garbage we've had to tolerate. Kevin Newman, CTV, major station, you know, he's not a bad journalist. I don't watch him very often, but he does some quite hard-hitting interviews. I want you to watch, it's fairly long, for about 3 minutes of interview here with a spokesman for Chief Spence. And bear all this in mind. Racism. One of the most noble achievements of the Western world is the aspiration towards, and often the achievement of, the notion that everyone is equal. Race, religion, gender, sexuality, we treat you equally. We will praise you and criticize you equally. The racism of lowered expectations. Native leaders being patted on the back, well done, don't ask a serious question because they're native. How dare you, sir? How dare you? And so many people have done this. If the politician was white, non-native, the questions would be penetrating. But you're seeing this interview, how flabby and how embarrassing the questioning is. Look at some of the answers that are given, how they're simply non-answers, the lack of follow-up to the non-answers, and also something in the middle, which is, well, I suppose messianic. Have a look at this now, please.
For the last many years, there's been a lot of broken promises or situations have changed for First Nations communities, and she wants to wait until the outcome of that meeting. She wants that meeting to happen between the Prime Minister, the Governor General, the Ontario Premier, and the First Nations leadership. However, we're very cautious, and she wants to wait based on the outcome of that meeting. We want positive results.
What kind of personal experience has this been for her? I mean, when I was there were people who line up. You know, it's almost they're treating her as almost as if she's sacred, and you know, prime ministers are meeting her. When this is all over, is she going to be able to go back to just being a normal person? Do you think?
I believe she will go back to being a normal person. This has been an overwhelming experience for herself and for all her helpers, especially myself. I think if you can understand on a spiritual context, you know, this needed to happen. This was a calling. We lit that sacred fire for a reason. Many thousands of years ago, the Christ Jesus was born from the Virgin Mary, and this is a different situation, but the same story where a fire needs to be lit, and people are praying for hope and salvation, and that's the basis of this gathering of all people, of all nations, and so therefore this was a calling.
Yeah. There's no doubt that there are many of your residents in your home in Attawapiskat and in many other reserves across the country that are living in some cases deplorable conditions. Chief Spence is not, and there were reports this week about her household income being in the 6 figures. What do you think of those reports?
I think those are, if I may say, incorrect reports. You know, we all, on behalf of all First Nations people, and especially remote, isolated communities, we still live in deplorable conditions. Even for myself, I don't even have my own house, you know. So that's how it is in our First Nations communities. And it stems from the way we're treated as First Nations peoples across Canada. You know, we're not treated with the same respect, we're not treated with the same dignity, although we get funding from the federal government through the Department of Indian Affairs. You know, honestly, it's still not enough to cover the housing crisis or the health care programs.
But as a person, she's almost become an international celebrity now. I mean, there's coverage around the world of Chief Spence. And I know some money is being raised on her behalf. I was at an event last night where about 100 people were charged about $20 to watch some pretty good music here in town. How is that money being spent?
That money is spent for the helpers, for all the expenses that comes with the helping person with his or her.
We're going to play another minute of it, but I'm about to vomit blood at this stage. You're intelligent people, you saw this. I was just making notes. Newman refers to her as being almost sacred. How will she be able to go back to being a normal person? What? He asked the spokesman a question about money. And we're going to get to this in a few moments' time. Hundreds of millions of dollars, and we now know more than 80% not accounted for. The guy says, I'm not really going to respond to that, and he just moves on. At one point, the native spokesman says, I don't even have my own house. Sorry, buddy, my grandfather fought almost 5 years in the Second World War, never owned his own house, rented an apartment in East London. So, work harder, save more. Did you see when Newman said he'd been to a fundraiser? Now, maybe he was reporting on the fundraiser, but I'd like to know more about that. What are your politics? Do you have any sense of objectivity? Can you be balanced about this? And of course, best of all, and Newman didn't even respond to this, was when we had the comparison with the Son of God. Can we see that again, please?
I think if you can understand on a spiritual context, this needed to happen. This was a calling. We lit that sacred fire for a reason. Many thousands of years ago, the Christ Jesus was born from the Virgin Mary, and this is a different situation, but the same story where a fire needs to be lit, and people are praying for hope and salvation, and that's the basis of this gathering of all people, of all nations, and so therefore this was a calling.
Yeah. It is very similar to the birth of the Son of God. In fact, it reminds me very much of, well, I can't really say it myself. Let's have a look at what it really reminds me of.
Tradition and inspiration, will and testament, doubt and faith.
Send us a promised one.
Lies the story of one man.
Prophecy there is mention made of a Messiah.
Who changed the world forever.
Who are you? Jesus.
I have come to bring salvation to the world.
The greatest story ever told.
I am your king.
I have no king.
What do you know about a man named Jesus from Nazareth?
He's the one.
The one what?
I am the resurrection. He that believeth in me, though he were dead, yet shall he live.
And then he serves fish broth to his followers and cures leprosy. And sometimes you couldn't make this up. Here is this plump native chief who is not on a hunger strike, who is still eating, consuming food, who has done an appalling job in her reserve, where people who should be living in luxury are living in filth. She goes on this little silly, clowny, circusy protest, and media. But now we have Deloitte & Touche, an accounting company. Now, these, with all due respect, these are the nerds, okay? These are boring guys. They're not political. They don't want to be involved. They don't want the spotlight or the limelight. But they come out with a report of what happened with all this money, okay? Severely critical of how Chief Spence and the Attawapiskat Band Council have spent about $90 million in federal funds over the past 5 years. According to a source who spoke to the Toronto Star, but it refused to be more specific about its recommendations. Here's the quotation. The situation right now is pretty tense. You saw the shutdowns, said an official, referring to protests that included a blockade of the railway between Toronto and Montreal that stranded more than 1,000 rail passengers on our trains. Quote, the dilemma now is this is a tense situation and the government is extremely concerned how this will be perceived because the audit is bad. So in other words, the auditors come out, and we have all the quotation. We're the people who really led this, but you're going to see this all over the place. Now, this is what you need to know. You really need to know this. An average of 81% of files did not have adequate supporting documents, and over 60% had no documentation of the reason of payment at all. Can you imagine if Revenue Canada, they say to you, well, 81% of your expense claims that there's insufficient documentation, and 60% there's nothing at all. And you say, yeah, that's okay, I'll go on a hunger strike. This is what the report said. We were unable to determine if the funds were spent for their intended purpose, $90 million of your money. There is no evidence of due diligence in the use of public funding, including the use of funds for housing. Yes, the people that are living in squalid, terrible conditions, I'm sorry, I weep for them. But who is to blame? Are you blaming Harper or some of those chiefs who seem to live fairly well, do they not? Not all of them. Some are very competent, very loving people, sacrificial people. But this woman who's on a hunger strike, and it's not a hunger strike, it's a sham and a shame, and what is really going on? And when we know about this, and we've known for some time, Ezra found a lot of this information, by the way, and with all due respect to Ezra, he's a great guy, but if he can find it, other people can as well. But why do people like Kevin Newman, and he's not alone, maybe he was the most, I suppose, repugnant example, but so many others will speak to native leaders and just say, oh, that's so wonderful, that's so marvellous. We shan't ask you a difficult question. The people who suffer, of course, are native people, because their plight remains as bad as ever. I hope we really are willing to grasp the nettle of truth and authenticity and courage and reveal and expose what this woman is doing, what's behind all of this, and how complicit the media is. And as for Paul Martin, you were finance minister and prime minister for so many years. What did you achieve for the native people? And now you go to visit her and say what an inspiration she is? There is a time for Canadian media and politicians and chattering classes and establishment to be ashamed. And that time is right now. This is in no way a rejection of the suffering and the pleading of native people. That's something that has to be dealt with. But this is a digression. The whole pretend hunger strike and everything surrounding it is a digression. It makes it worse, if anything. Faith Goldie joins us now. We just had some fun, in a way, with when a spokesman for Chief Spence compared her to the Son of God, the Prince of Peace. I didn't realize this. I think it's in the Apocrypha, one of the Gospels, we don't take it seriously, that Jesus took $90 million of public funding and had a lot of fish broth. But the comparisons, look, as a Christian, I don't find it offensive, I find it silly. As a Canadian, that's what I object to, that people assume that she's a godlike figure when she's very, very different from that.
I think actually there's a small prophecy in "The State is My Shepherd," that psalm, or was it Jesus' first work where he turned water into fish broth? I can't really recall. Nonetheless, no, there are some serious, I want to debunk the myth here. That's why I've been called on. Jesus did not make six figures. Okay, Jesus' apostles had to pay taxes. His apostles also didn't tamper with transport lines as to endanger the lives of over 1,000 people. And they also did not receive nearly $500 million worth of federal money from whoever might have been ruling at the time for a small group of, 1,500 folks and their 300 homes. So,
the United Church translation of the scripture, I think, maybe disagrees
Chief
with you.
Spence is somewhere in there. No, it's absolutely nutty. And as far as I'm concerned, what I find nearly as nutty as a spokesperson likening her to the Son of God, that guy, is the fact that Kevin Newman, Mr. Question Period, God bless his soul, the man who's supposed to be asking hard-hitting questions, doesn't say, okay, wait, forget about my next question for a moment. Can you just expand what exactly you meant by that metaphor, that simile there that you were bringing up? And so as far as I'm concerned, he said that, a sacred fire had to be started. There was this time, there was this zeitgeist really
many
in the air.
thousands of years ago.
Many thousand.
It's not Zeus we're talking about.
So he said, a sacred fire had to be lit. Well, there is a fire being lit, and there's a lot of smoke, but it's mostly just smoke and mirrors. Because as we know, as of today, I know that you're going to have our dear Andrew Lawton on to talk about this audit that came out. But guess what? Deloitte released a note to Attawapiskat, namely Chief Spence, in August of 2012. Bada bing, bada boom. You've got your smoke and mirrors, okay,
folks? You think this is being done to digress from the fact that there could be some very serious questions asked about where this money went?
I mean, is it that strange, Michael? Over 80%, just over 80% of spending unaccounted for. I mean, I've read through the main bullets of the report so far, and then the timing is just coincidental. All of a sudden, she pitches a TP. You don't think that this is a bit of smoke and mirrors to distract?
Paul Martin, look, a lot of the people who are going to visit are just lightweight, but Paul Martin's a serious man, a serious figure.
Of course.
Would he not have done some investigation or his people before he went to see her?
Or during the 10 years that he was serving our country in public service, then could he have helped Attawapiskat? I don't know.
I wonder what will happen now. Is this the end of her little show? The cause will go on, but she will disappear somehow. Do you think that'll happen?
I don't know. I mean, I'm likening it to the Occupy movement as far as I'm concerned. A lot of noise, a lot of followers, a lot of media attention, but very little substance. And I think that, we might have a yearly hunger strike or something like that. I think that this will go down, at least in the short-term Canadian history. We'll see it bump up every now and then.
A great pleasure. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Michael.